This is my 5th video on the tarot about the Major Arcana. So as in the other videos, we'll do a brief review. The tarot consists of 78 cards. 56 of these fall into 4 suits: the swords, the cups, the wands, the pentacle. And the first 4 videos were about those 4 suits. This video is about the other 22 cards, a series of 22 archetypal images called the Major Arcana. So let's talk about the Major Arcana. So you'll notice that with the individual suits, I talked about a particular psychological function, a particular element. That's not appropriate to talk about with the Major Arcana. One way to say it is the Major Arcana is about our journey toward wholeness. So it's not about any one capacity. It's about wholeness, about everything we are. Another way to say it is that it represents the hero's journey, the cycle of the hero's journey, very much in the Joseph Campbell tradition. And another way to say it is it lays out the spiritual path. That one way to think about it is that Arthur Waite was familiar with the nature of the entire spiritual path and really, in symbolic form, gave us clues to the entire spiritual journey. So these are different ways to think about the Major Arcana. Let's look at these cards. So the first card, number 0, incidentally, the cards are numbered from 0 to 21. And the 0 card is the Fool. And I will say the word fool in the modern world, we often equate it with someone who's stupid or idiotic. That's not really what fool connotes. In the medieval world view, the fool was someone who was innocent. They didn't have knowledge of the world simply because of their innocence and inexperience, not because they were dim-witted. The fool was also someone who was present with the king, who could ask the question that no one else would ask, who could speak the truth that no one else would speak. And because they were a fool or a jester, they could get away with it. You know, it's been a danger for politicians in any period of history that, of course, politicians like to have, strong rulers like to have people who surround them and tell them what they want to hear. And so the vassals of a king would quickly learn this message. We're only going to tell the king stuff that the king wants to hear. But the trouble is that we all need feedback. And sometimes the feedback we most desperately need is feedback we most desperately don't want to hear. And that was the value of the fool. He could say that difficult thing that the king didn't want to hear, but the king needed to hear, And so here the fool is innocently walking along, holds a flower, has flowers on his robe. The little dog of fear is barking, but he's not paying attention and is about just to take the plunge. He's about to just walk right off a cliff, And I love this image because when we're at the beginning of a hero's journey, we usually don't feel like a hero. We usually feel like a fool, And so it's really about that very beginning of setting out on the cycle of the hero's journey, beginning our spiritual practice, all of this, just the raw, foolish beginning, not even knowing where it's going to go. Immediately we meet the magician. The magician is the master of the tarot. This is the only card in the whole deck that has the representatives of the 4 suits: cups, wands, swords, and pentacles, all in the same card. So he has these on the table. So he is the master of all those functions. He's also pointing up and down, representing uniting what is above and what is below. So he's a master of spiritual wisdom, a master of bodily wisdom. Of course, there's tremendous growth all around him, tremendous plant life above and below him. So this is very much a life-affirming wisdom that he brings. You might say that this is the wise old man at the beginning of any kind of fairy tale. This is Merlin in the Arthur stories. This is Ben Kenobi. This is Gandalf. you know. And really what it represents is this wisdom is always there in the world, but until we take the first step, the step of the fool, until we start looking around, we don't realize that the wisdom is there. And suddenly we start on this journey and we realize, oh, I'm taking this journey, I need wisdom. And then we look around and we find that there is wisdom waiting for us in the world. It was always there, but our eyes weren't open to it, you know? It's also a wise part of ourselves that we begin to tap into. And then we start to follow this wise part of ourselves that we hadn't been aware of before. So this is the magician. And the quote unquote magic that he performs is simply what happens when we live our life with wisdom. After the magician, we have the four parental figures. And these are right at the beginning because any journey of self-discovery begins with renegotiating our early childhood stuff, you know, our conceptions of our own parents, our relation to the masculine and feminine, you know, of course, stereotypically, and, you know, psychoanalysis begins with the psychoanalyst saying, tell me about your mother, you know, this kind of thing. So it all begins with parental figures. So we get four parental figures, two mother figures and two father figures. The first is the high priestess. This is a terrifying figure. This is a figure of the deep inner feminine wisdom that we can never really master, that we can never really understand fully. You know, this is the wisdom that charges us to be everything that we are, that calls us to risk everything we are for the sake of our own authenticity, you know? And so it's a terrifying wisdom. This is what Marion Woodman calls the dark goddess. So she has an ornate headdress. She has a scroll sort of tucked into her robe, hidden wisdom. It reads Torah, or if you read it backwards, it would be, rearrange the letters, it would be tarot. So it's the hidden wisdom of the tarot. She has a crescent moon at her feet, and her gown is melting into water. Behind her are pomegranates, recalling Persephone, the princess who was part in the underworld, 6 months in the underworld, 6 months at the surface. This is the underworld aspect of Persephone. The pillars next to her, B and J, they stand for Boaz and Yakin. And this is from the Bible, the Temple of Solomon. So in the Second Samuel's, Solomon builds a tremendous temple. And we're just told kind of out of the blue that there were these two giant pillars at the entrance of the temple. And for some reason, they were named Boaz and Yakin. There's a lot of mystical speculation about them, but the Bible doesn't really explain why they had those names. But for whatever reason, those are the names of the pillars at the front of the Temple of Solomon. So here, they represent the opening of a temple, but behind her is not a temple. Behind her is a dark lake. So in other words, the dark waters, the hidden waters, this is where her wisdom comes from. This is her temple. It's a temple of mystery. It's a temple of everything that all the wisdom that we can't quite articulate. This is the high priestess. It's a very intimidating figure, a very powerful card. So as a mother figure, the high priestess I would describe as cold and distant. The next mother figure is quite the opposite. The Empress, here she's under a golden sky. The Empress is a figure of tremendous love. This is the mother's love that allows you to love yourself. It's a tremendously powerful image. It's a tremendously powerful part of the psyche. This is the archetypal mother that loves us exactly as we are. And it can be a very powerful experience to ground into this experience of the archetypal mother within us. The Empress I would describe as warm and near. So this is a very different mother figure from the high priestess, very warm and affirming. The emperor is more of a personal father figure. So the emperor, this is a very hard figure. Of course, he wears the armor under his robe. He's ready for defense. You know, this is a person, this is a real manly man, and he shows respect, and he gains respect because he shows deep respect. You know, he holds a lot of honor, and he honors others, and that is part of how he shows his own honor. You know, and so there's something very tough about him, but there's also something very ennobling about him. You know, he holds up a high standard and expects you to live up to that standard. You know, and so it's challenging, but there's deep satisfaction that comes from living up to the standard and really satisfying this force. And so this is a powerful masculine presence within the psyche. I would describe this masculine figure as cold and near. And then finally, completing the sequence, the impersonal father, sort of mirroring the high priestess as the impersonal mother. The impersonal father is the Hierophant. The Hierophant it's kind of a pope figure. So this is, unlike the emperor, this is about spiritual wisdom. This is about the spiritual ideals that can guide us in life, the spiritual standards for which we strive. And so the Hierophant I would describe as warm and distant. A very powerful card, tremendous wisdom, tremendous inspiration. So after we have the parental lessons, then we have the lovers. This is the magic of the honeymoon period. It can be in a relationship, two people having the honeymoon experience with each other, a beautiful experience. It can be the honeymoon experience at the beginning of meditating or the beginning of a spiritual path, you know. And so there's a lot of joy and magic. You know, the magic doesn't last. Enjoy the ride while it's going on, because it doesn't last forever, you know. But it's a magic of kind of an initial honeymoon experience with all the magic and excitement of that. With the Chariot, the honeymoon is over. This is where we're doing the work. The couple that we saw in the previous card, now they've turned into Sphinx and they're pulling the Chariot. So they're doing the daily work. So in a romantic relationship, this is when the honeymoon work wears off, and now people are actually doing the hard work of loving each other daily. You know, this is when the honeymoon excitement about meditation wears off, and we're just sitting in meditation, doing the work every day, you know, and it's hard and it's disciplined. So notice that the Chariot is pulling a divine figure. There's a sense that we're doing this work for something greater, and we don't even know necessarily exactly what we're doing the work for, but we're doing this work consistently with discipline. So there's a tremendous amount of discipline associated with this card. This is the discipline that it takes to sit in meditation every day, the discipline it takes to be authentic every day with your lover, you know, this kind of thing. So once we learn this discipline, then we can start approaching the 5 moral lessons. The first of the moral lessons is strength. And this is a fascinating card because she's not brutalizing the lion. She's not dominating the lion. She connects with the lion. She has tamed the lion through gentleness, you know? And really the connotation here is the ability to relate to myself or to relate to others with gentleness, with empathy, and to get what we want through connection, through empathy. You know, this is the strength that invites out the very best in others. You know, so it's a very powerful card. And how can I say? if I were to go around and like dominating people in the short term, I might get a little bit of what I want from dominating people. But in the long term, I'm going to turn those people against me. They're not going to want to work with me anymore. They may oppose me, this kind of thing. Whereas this sort of strength, where I'm connecting with others in a way that draws out the best of them, this builds lasting relationships. This builds lasting allies. So this is a real strength. This is strength that really endures. It's very auspicious, which is why we have the golden sky here. The next moral lesson is the hermit. This image might be familiar from the Led Zeppelin 4 album. The hermit is about the wisdom of going inward, the wisdom of isolating oneself and really understanding, what do I think? What do I feel? And it takes a long time. It takes a lot of practice before we can really hear our own voice, our own essential voice, It takes a lot of time to silence all the chatter in our head, all the other people's voices that we've imported and that keep talking to us in our head. It takes tremendous discipline to get to that place where I'm silent enough where I can hear my own authentic voice. That's what the hermit is about, finding one's own voice and one's own perspective. The third moral lesson is the Wheel of Fortune. This was a very powerful medieval countercultural symbol. There's a lot to unpack here. First of all, the four yellow figures at the perimeter are the four evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, in their symbolic form. And so this represents something about the sacred. But what's at the center is not an image of, God on the throne or something like that. It's this countercultural image of the Wheel of Fortune. So around the wheel, if we go counterclockwise around the wheel, we get Torah, wisdom. If we go clockwise around the wheel, we get tarot. So tarot or Torah. In between the letters, we have Hebrew letters. That's actually the famous tetragrammaton, the famous unpronounceable name of God given in the Hebrew Bible. It corresponds to the letters YHWH, the name of God that you cannot articulate, although Christians articulate it as Yahweh or Jehovah. So it's the name of God. There are also the alchemical symbols of the four elements inside the wheel, and the wheel is turning. So we have Anubis, the figure of the underworld in red. He's under the wheel. And of course, the Sphinx is sitting on top of the wheel. So this is the role of a spiritual person, a spiritual force. A spiritual force can sit on top of a turning wheel, but we can't sit there. The Wheel of Fortune represents the fact that when the king tries to climb up, he gets to the top, and then the forces immediately throw him back down. And so there's just these ups and downs of life. And if we're at the periphery of life, we're constantly experiencing ups and downs of life. If we're living life in a very superficial way, the real lesson of the Wheel of Fortune is put yourself at the center. When you're at the center, you're no longer experiencing the ups and downs. That's the one stable place, not on the periphery, but at the axle of the wheel. Put yourself at the center, and you'll have a much calmer experience. The fourth moral lesson is justice. And this is a tricky one, How fair are we? How fair are we really, And most of us, we're probably fair most of the time when we're feeling good, when we're feeling, when our needs are satisfied, when we're happy, How fair are we when we're triggered? How fair are we when we're totally pissed off at someone, And how fair are we at ourselves? Because I think in truth to tell, we're both much easier on ourselves and much harder on ourselves than we are at others. We apply one standard to others and another completely different standard to ourselves, So justice is about looking at all of that. How fair are we? Are we really just to ourselves and just to others? Do we treat ourselves with the same standards that we treat others, And do we do we remain in that place of justice regardless of our emotional states? So these are very hard questions that are challenges that are posed by the image of justice. After justice, we come to the hanged man. And so something qualitative shifts in the journey at this point. We've only had 4 of the 5 moral lessons, but it's interrupted by the hanged man. So this is the point in our spiritual work, this is the point in our journey where suddenly everyday life doesn't make sense anymore. Suddenly we're looking at everyday life and it all looks upside down. It all looks crazy. We're trying to make sense of, why does this make sense, you know? And so the hanged man is about being at that place of, wow, ordinary life seems bizarre to me at this point, or the way I've been living my life up to this point no longer makes sense. This image corresponds to a Hopi word, the Hopi word koyanis katsi. The Hopi word koyanis katsi means life out of balance. And the connotation is a life so out of balance that it is calling for another way of living. Okay, that's what we're experiencing at the hanged man. The hanged man draws on a mythological image from Norse mythology. Odin hung himself on the world tree. Odin sacrificed himself to Odin, and he hung on the world tree for 9 days as a sacrifice to himself. And then on the 9th day, he was able to read the mystic runes, and that gave him the power to be the king of the gods. So there's something in this also of a voluntary sacrifice, a sacrifice I'm doing in order to gain wisdom. So part of it is about in one way or another, it's a departure from the way we have been living. And kind of, you know, the way I have been living has been strange. It's crazy. I need to change it, but I don't know where this is going. And this is followed by death. Now, this is not necessarily, this card doesn't necessarily connote physical death, but it is a kind of psychological death. It's the death of a way of being. So in other words, the conventional way of being that was called into question in the hanged man, that's what dies here. And so we see, if we look at the card carefully, we see that, of course, the king has already fallen, his crown has gone rolling. The bishop is praying, you know, that his prayers are no good. He's going to die anyway. I love the young lady at the far right. She's just turning away. I can't possibly bear to look at this. You know, she's going to die anyway. But the young child in blue is offering a flower. And that flower is echoed by the flower on death's banner. And the secret of this card is really in the behavior of that child. The secret is the surrender. When we have to lose a part of our life, when part of our life, part of what we've identified with, we've lost, we need to take that with a kind of surrender. So that's the deeper message of this card. Surrendering into the change, surrendering into the letting go of what had been a familiar way of living. It's only after death that we get to temperance. So temperance is about a self-balancing. Notice the angel is pouring water from one cup to another and is standing half on land, half in water. So it's about a self-balancing, a self-regulating, you know, and one way to say it is all of us have ways that we have moments when we're difficult to deal with. We all have that. That's just part of what it means to be human, you know? Temperance is about that recognition of, gee, there are moments when I'm hard to deal with, and kind of the humility and the self-balancing that comes from that insight. So this is the 5th of the moral lessons, but it really only can come fully once we've passed through the hanged man and death. So it's a very auspicious card, a very wise card, a deep kind of wisdom that comes with a deep sort of self-seeing. This leads us to the throne of the devil. And so on the devil card, we see this horrendous figure of the devil. We also see the lovers. They're now chained to the throne of the devil. Quite a journey these two lovers have had. They've grown horns now. One way to say this is about attachment. You know, the second noble truth of Buddhism says the cause of all suffering is attachment, you know. And this is what attachment really looks like. When we're attaching, we're enchaining ourselves to pain. We're enchaining ourselves to the throne of the devil, you know. And of course, we have attachments to opinions. We have attachment to political opinions and philosophical opinions. We may even be attached to religious ideals, you know, and this is tricky. Sometimes we have to loosen our attachment to our religious ideals in order to grow more spiritually, you know. And so there's a real paradox there. I will say that the deepest attachments, the attachments that really affect the largest part of our lives, are the attachments that are unconscious. You know, I may go through life and I'll be asking, how come I keep on reliving this situation over and over again? How come I keep creating this mess over and over again? You know, this kind of thing. It's because of this deep attachment. And at a certain point in our spiritual work, we actually get to the root of that attachment. We see the core fear. And it's usually a horrifying fear to come in contact with, you know, this root fear when we're trying to unplug that attachment. And we have tremendous fear. We know we want to break this attachment, but we don't even know where it's going to lead. And all the fear associated with the devil is because we don't want to go here, the tower. So the tower represents, the high, narrow tower represents some high, constrained way of being that was constraining my life, that was trapping me in walking on this one narrow path and repeating these same mistakes over and over again. So the thunderbolt hits and the figures are knocked out of the tower and they're plummeting through space. One way to say it is, this is what freedom looks like. Freedom in its raw form is terrifying, you know? People say they want to be free until they confront this and they don't want this, you know? So this is freedom. Another way to say this is, often on the spiritual journey, we find that maybe for a large part of our lives, we were standing on something that we considered ground within us. And then as we confront the devil, as we confront the hanged man and death and the devil, then what we considered ground dissolves. Now we're falling. Now we don't know who we are. What's happening is we're coming to a deeper ground within us. And so part of what's going on with the tower is dropping down to a deeper ground within us. And the first time this happens, it's very disorienting. We don't know what's happening. As we're more a veteran of spiritual unfolding, then it can be something that we're more used to, you know, this experience of dropping down to a deeper ground within us when what we had been standing on, the ground that we had been standing on, dissolves or is pulled away. So a tremendously challenging, tremendously difficult card. After we've broken the attachment with the devil and gone through the tower, this is the first place where we've actually experienced touching a deeper ground within us. And so the figure is naked. That is to say, she's vulnerable. She's open to experience. She's pouring water both onto land and back into the water. That is to say, she's aware of influences from both the conscious and the unconscious. There's a phoenix on the tree behind her, the bird of rebirth. And what's most prominent is the star. The star is just a direction to start walking. And she doesn't know how her life is going to develop. She doesn't know the whole plan. All she has at this point is this direction, and she's going to start walking in this direction. And so that star is just everything at this point in the spiritual unfolding. Then we get to the moon. Well, at the stage of the moon, we're still in the dark, but now the path is clear. There's a jackal and a dog howling at the moon. There's a crayfish. This represents the assorted fears that we're going to confront, but we have to walk between those towers and follow that path back into the mountains. And so this is when we're clear about the path. We know that we're journeying toward light. So we're not out of the dark place yet, but we definitely are moving forward. And there's a kind of rugged hope associated with this card. Then finally, we emerge from that whole dark part of the journey with the sun. And so first of all, the child is on the horse. There's a kind of innocence here, sunflowers, the child, it's represented by a child because it's innocent alive, having that experience of innocence in the world again. The sun, of course, has straight lines and wavy lines. And so that represents integrating knowledge of light and dark. We've seen the devil. We've been through the tower. We've seen all that. Now the light of day looks different because we've been through all those experiences, and we're able to re-experience the world as something new. And then a paradoxical image. This is the Christian image of the Last Judgment. The angel blows the trumpet and everyone rises from their graves. What is this about? Why is this here? Well, this is the paradox. When I change, then my world changes also. If I'm walking around self-absorbed, I'm probably walking around in a gray, lifeless world. But if I've been through this healing journey and I affirm light and dark in myself, well, then I'm in a place where I can affirm light and dark in the world. The more we can accept the world as it is, the more the world becomes alive. So this is about relationships in our life, or just about the world in general, things that had been dead or dormant coming to life, and they're coming to life precisely because we have integrated wisdom by passing through that entire journey. And the concluding figure, number 21, is the world. So she is also naked, vulnerable. She dances at the center. She has those wands that represent spiritual wisdom, again, pointing up and pointing down. Again, we have the four symbols of the evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John at the corners. And so this is someone in a place of complete innocence, able to accept the world as it is, able to dance with life freely. And so in a way, it's a kind of enlightenment figure, but it's also a kind of innocence figure. And in a strange way, when we're innocent, then we're ready to be the fool again, and we're ready to start the journey all over again. So there really is a way that the end plugs into the beginning. But this is definitely a place in the cycle where we've gone through a complete cycle. There's joy and fulfillment, and we can dance with life.